up and running, are we? All right. Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome, boys and girls, and a good afternoon, one and all. Peach Guitars is here live once again. Happy Wednesday afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. So, right, what are we going to do this week? Now, I've put a rather tantalising title on this one because I wanted to kind of pique your interest as to what we might be doing here. So, it dawned on me as I was preparing an idea for today's video. What are the kind of guitar buying habits of you all out there and the general public at large? Now, I don't work in the sales department here, so I don't really have, I'm not kind of tuned in, if you will, to the kind of everyday practices of selling the guitars. And therefore, I'm a little bit out of the loop. But it does kind of seem to me that most guitars these days, now, as with everything we've been through in the past couple of years, prices of things are certainly higher than they used to be, that's for sure. And it seems to me, just looking at our website today, that everything in the electric market, at least, has really settled on this nice little comfortable price point of around £2,000, okay? And there are definitely some exceptions to that, some things that are well below that price point, and there are some things, of course, that are worth putting in the extra money for as well. I suppose for any of our American viewers watching, I'm talking about $2,500 maybe. That kind of price bracket. And the more I looked on the site, the more I found, the more great examples that back up this theory kind of rang true. A lot of what we sell the most of, certainly what I get to demo the most of, all sit in that kind of price bracket. And I want to kind of explore why that is. Now, you watching this may have a very different take on things. You may be thinking, £2,000 for a guitar? I'll never spend that much money on something. Equally, some of you may be watching from your ivory towers thinking, £2,000? I don't remember the last time I even saw £2,000. I deal in 6 digits only for my instruments. Fair enough. Whatever your tipple may be. But I think for a lot of people out there, some examples. Okay, so a lot of the USA Fenders are now sitting around that £2,000 mark. A lot of the USA Gibsons are sitting around that mark as well. Les Paul Standards, the new Faded series from Gibson, the Faded Standards. A lot of PRS S2 guitars are around there. You've also got some great deals at the minute on stuff like the PRS Fiore, the Mark Lettieri, awesome signature guitar. That's around the £2,000 mark. They just kept coming out of the woodwork, thick and fast, as I was looking for them. So, rather than pander to those stereotypes, if you will, the guitars that are the most popular, unarguably, I thought, let me dig a little deeper and find 3 examples of things for around that kind of money that maybe you haven't seen before, maybe you hadn't considered before, maybe you were even unaware they existed before. And I want to start with this, what I'm holding, of course. Duesenberg. So, this is just an awesome guitar brand, Duesenberg guitars. For as long as I've been here at the shop, these have always been here, and I always enjoy when I get to play them. Unfortunately, I haven't played very many of these recently, but it's always kind of a joy when I get to. So these things are kind of the epitome of classiness, in my estimation. So for the money that they cost, which I have to say, of all the other brands, I think they haven't shot up in value like some of the other brands have. You know, they've kind of maintained their prices. They've managed to keep relatively good margins intact, which means for you, the end user, the buyers out there, you're actually still getting a really good value guitar, even with the inflation of the past couple of years. Now, I'm not an economist or anything like that, but all I can say is these are still exceptionally good value for what they are. And this one spoke to me today. I happened to see this one. I thought, yep, that's going to go in the video. This vintage white Style Player TV. Now, I remember, again, when I first joined the shop, seeing a lot of these things in these gorgeous, like, sparkle finishes. They really know how to make a guitar finish, Duesenberg. But even in these kind of block colour, fairly standard-looking guitars, they've still got a real element of class and sophistication to them. With the binding, the black. Actually, I've only just noticed this. It looks like a solid black back, but maybe in this side camera, perhaps you can see, that is a flamey piece of maple hiding under there. which should allude to the fact that this, despite its appearance, is not just another standard single cut style instrument. It's definitely not a Gibson or anything like that. They really have their own tonal identity, very much so. Not least by the fact that it's semi-hollow. You've got a humbucking pickup in the bridge and then a P90 style in the neck. And of course you have this Duesenberg's own design, but a Bigsby style tailpiece. So without further ado, let me play you some tones and you tell me what you think. I think for the money, once again, this is one of the more unique contributions to today's list. Let's check it out. So these things have an abundance of chime to them, and this is something that I've talked about before in videos, the word chime. It's a very interesting kind of little tagline. Basically, most people think, probably correctly, it refers to treble. But that doesn't mean that it's just bright in an unpleasant, piercing, abrasive way. To me, it harnesses that natural quality that most guitars have of that treble, that cut, and it finesses it and it kind of smooths it out and makes it appealing and usable. And Duesenberg do this in a very unique way, not least because the middle position between the bridge and the neck pickups is usually wide out of phase. And that's what you're hearing here. So it kind of has this, this nasal mid-range quality to it, which when I put on a little bit of overdrive, you'll hear brings out these extra harmonics, and yet it still has this top end. And largely, I suppose that's from the maple body. Some of it, I think, comes from the tailpiece as well, not being hunkered down like a Gibson would be. And the whole thing, with the aesthetic of it kind of looking very sleek and classy, like I was talking about, combined with that tonal sensibility, it just makes for a very luxurious feeling kind of package. Something that I think in today's guitar market, you could fairly expect to command a higher price tag than it does. But for whatever miracle and virtue, they're actually not crazy money. They fit really nicely into this price sweet spot that I've been talking about. Let me show you a couple more tones real quick. Kind of covered the cleaner end of things. let's dirty it up and see how this handles it. Remember, it's a semi-hollow instrument. Let's see what it does. Multiple personalities going on in this guitar, I would say. It can handle the more aggressive stuff, and it does it with a real nice edge as well. But it still is nice and civilized, kind of waiting for you to come back home to those cleaner tones. A really good all-rounder, and certainly not one that most people consider. And I say wrongly. I think it's time to have another look at Duesenberg, especially when we're talking about this prospect of really good value instruments around this £2,000 kind of mark. So let's change lanes completely for guitar number 2. Now, as I said earlier on, I wanted to keep this clear of any stereotypes and things you see very often. So no Gibson today, no Fender today. I've already kind of done the single cut, you know, the classy guitar, if you like, the sort of the luxury automobile of the running. It's definitely got that kind of elegant nature to it. This next guitar, while being very cool and very well made, I'm not going to use the word elegant to describe it. This thing is rough and ready. Very nicely so, though. So, if you have a couple of grand or so burning a hole in your pocket, and you don't want a Duesenberg, that's just not going to work for you. Here's something, again, that perhaps we haven't given quite enough coverage to here on the Peach Guitars channel, but these did make quite a big splash when they came out. They had a really good launch campaign from Fender. This new Jackson SL3, really, really nice soloist in a bunch of different colours. This green one, I think, was the most eye-catching. That's why I chose it today. So it's an HSS, but perhaps not as we know it. Certainly not like any other HSS guitars that we regularly cover. Floyd Rose equipped, set neck, 24 fret, locking nut. This is very unusual for us anyway. So let's see what it does. Now, despite it being an HSS and all the kind of typical stuff you might expect out of a guitar with this pickup configuration, we're not going to go for any of that, okay? Because it's just not what it's designed to do. It's designed to rock and roll. Let's check it out. Very different indeed, very different. So this has a real articulation to it. Now, a lot of guitars that are associated with this style, and indeed from this brand and from other brands that kind of make these more contemporary style instruments, they have this association with only doing, you know, heavily distorted tones, usually with not a great deal of definition. But by way of, you know, a really sparkly, shimmery kind of clean tone, that, well, shimmery is perhaps the wrong word, but very well defined clean tone, all the way up to a really higher gain thing. It can still do a lot of different levels of aggression and a lot of different nuances within the tonal spectrum, which perhaps its looks may not lead to believe on first viewing. So again, for this kind of money, you get a proper USA-made Jackson, for one thing, which is a rarity these days outside of the custom shop, unfortunately. So it's got that going for it, at least. It looks very cool. I mean, whether this is going to be your thing or not, it is what it is. It's totally unapologetic about that. It's not trying to blend in. It's not trying to fool you that it can, you know, hang at your jazz club gig or anything like that. It's just unapologetic, and I really do like it for that. And then the fact that it's completely bare bones and stripped back and just completely comfortable, yet still versatile, covers a lot of ground, and it just makes for a very nice playing and sounding guitar. Whether it's your thing, who knows? But back to this topic again of kind of the ultimate price point to be spending money on guitars these days. It's another USA-made instrument, very high quality, and yet on a totally different page to that first guitar. So I think this is kind of emphasizing the point, hopefully, that when you get into this kind of price bracket, you're covering a lot of ground. You have a lot of options to explore. Not least of which is going to be the third and final guitar for today. So I said earlier on that there are just so many options. So when I was looking for things to include in today's list, I really had a hard time picking things just to revamp on what I was saying earlier. Fender's got their new American Vintage 2 lineup, which is kind of the pinnacle of their USA standard arrangement. That's sitting right here in this kind of bracket. PRS, in fact, which I'll talk about in a moment, obviously, The Fiores are on sale right now. The Marc Lethierry Signature Fiore, I didn't even realise, is on a very nice deal in this kind of price bracket. You've also got a ton of, you know, stuff like that, Jackson, if that's your thing. You've got ESPs out there, you've got Schecters, you've got loads and loads of different options. I implore you to check out the website when you're done with this video and just see the full extent of the selection for yourself. But I feel like this is a good representative by way of 3 different examples. Now, I want to finish here, and despite me excluding Fender and Gibson from today's video selection, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bypass PRS. Now, we've talked about PRS a lot recently, so I can't blame you if you're just a bit fed up by this point of seeing PRS guitars. However, we've covered several different styles and topics of videos, and yet they always seem to find their way in, don't they? And the reason for that is they just do basically everything pretty damn well. So whether it's Black Friday deals with their SE guitars way down in the £500, £600, £700 kind of price mark, you know, if that's your first guitar or your first serious guitar, or you're just looking for a certain style of instrument, maybe a hollow body, or you wanted to check out one of the SE Silver Skies without spending a huge ton of money, that's a great option. At the other end of the scale, you've got the beautiful private stocks and amazing artist packs and core line guitars, which in and of themselves, even though they are extremely expensive instruments, they represent a lot of value when you factor in the craftsmanship, the scarcity of those pieces, the efforts that go into making them, and yet compared to other boutique brands, they're still pretty much consistently underpricing a lot of those other brands. And then you land here. Now, we talked about this being the sweet spot, about £2,000. S2 is where you're going to find yourselves. Now, this one is a pretty special guitar because this run of McCarty 594 S2 guitars are actually exclusives. So we're very lucky to partner with PRS and produce these guitars, which I'm sure you will have noticed by now, all sport very nice quilty tops. Now, I don't know which camera I'll be showing this to. I'm going to go for this one here on the... Okay, I'm going to go for that one there on the side. Thank you, Ryan. That's a nice top for £2,000. Very nice top. So this is one of the cherry bursts, I believe. There's a bunch of different finishes. This was one of the nicer ones, in my opinion. So it looks the part. You know it's going to sound the part. I'll prove that in a moment, but you know PRSs always sound great. And we were lucky, a couple of months ago, you may have seen, to host a day, not just an evening clinic, but an entire day with Mr. Paul Reed-Smith. And right at the end of the day, he graciously signed a bunch of these backplates as well on these S2 guitars. So if you're fairly quick and nimble, you can get one of these in the colour that you wish with a signed backplate. So that's pretty cool. So these represent a nice balance between the 2 other guitars I talked about. They obviously have more of a vintage sensibility to them because it's a single cut, it's a McCarty. It has all of that heritage attached to it that PRS is known to put into their McCarty guitars. But on the other hand, it's a PRS. So it plays every bit like a modern guitar. It's made to the high standards of modern guitars with that level of consistency to it as well. And it's very versatile because you have these humbucking pickups, but they coil split as well. So let's check out some tones. lot of different sounds coming out of this thing. So it definitely is a vintage-natured instrument. It kind of has that going for it, but it doesn't have the kind of very distinct mid-range signature stamp on it that a Gibson guitar does. Yet it can still cop some of those tones. It's not quite as articulate and punchy as that Jackson was, and yet it can still kind of get into that territory. And it's not quite as airy as that Duesenberg was, and yet it can still kind of do that a little bit as well. So it's one of those guitars that covers a lot of bases, and I think it's important to put across with all three of these examples that I've shown you, none of them compromise. And this is where I think this price point now starts to make more sense once again, because you certainly can spend a lot less money on guitars these days, and that's the beautiful thing. You know, more and more brands are making guitars accessible at way, way better price points. You don't always have to go to US-made guitars, and that's just an undeniable truth. And yet, when you do, you know, personal circumstances aside, if you're able to or not, that's, you know, totally subjective thing. But when you do, it's very hard now to not see where the value is, if that makes sense. You know, whether you can choose to do without it or not is totally up to you. And I don't begrudge anybody for going for more cost-effective guitars. It totally makes sense. But you do see where your money goes. And maybe this is also the point, not only where you can kind of aspire to be, but also, do you need to aspire any further? I think that's a big question as well. This kind of price point is a serious price point. It's a lot of money. And I think the reason so many brands are sticking with it, at least for the time being, is because they realise what players actually want and what players actually need. There's a lot of excess to spending more money here. Do you really need it? I think there's a lot of great options right now for this kind of price bracket, and I do appreciate, and I do really want to stress, is a hell of a lot of money still. So I'm not trying to make out that these are affordable, but I do think value is the word here, the word of the day. And I'd like to know your thoughts, and I'm sure in the live chat it's already been ablaze, tearing me to pieces, or backing up my claims. I don't know. I hope that it's healthy discussion anyway. But let me know in the comments whether you agree. Do you think this is the sweet spot for price, or do you think I'm way off the mark? I'd very much like to know your thoughts, and indeed, what you would choose to spend that level of money on, if not any of the options I've talked about here, or indeed, also, how much are you prepared to spend on a new guitar? Because that is a very interesting topic, and I hope to carry this on in the comments below. So I'm going to call an end to this live video, but thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it vaguely interesting at least. Just to recap, we've explored 3 guitars for around the £2,000 price mark. We had a Duesenberg Style Player TV, we had a Jackson SL3 USA made soloist, and we had this Peach exclusive, Paul Reed Smith signed, S2 McCarty 594 quilt top. 3 very different guitars, 3 very different options, and yet they all make a good deal of sense. You let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great week, folks. Take care, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.